Becky, thank you for that introduction. And just a few words about the logistics for today. I plan on talking for about 40 minutes and then leaving a good 20 for questions and answers. But if you have a burning question that needs to be addressed right away, if you'd write it in the chat box, I've asked Becky to kind of follow that and let me know. She can break into my presentation and make sure that we address your burning question if it's something that cannot wait. So let me go ahead and get started. Thanks for sharing a part of your day with me to learn about soil solarization. First of all, what is solarization? Why should anyone think about solarizing soil? How does it work, and how do you solarize soil? These are questions that I hope to address in my presentation today. First of all, what is solarization? Solarization is the process of using passive solar energy to heat the soil. And the reason for heating the soil is that it weakens or kills weed seeds and undesirable soil-borne plant pathogens. And this process of solar heating is enhanced by placing a piece of transparent clear plastic film on top of the soil surface and sealing the edges to trap that heat so that it does not escape. Now, soil solarization is something that you would do before you plant. It is a pre-plant soil treatment. As I mentioned, it uses passive soil energy, reduces weeds and soil-borne pathogens without chemical pesticides, and reduces the labor needed for hand weeding. Soil solarization was started in the 1970s by a group of Israelis who were trying to find some way of reducing weed pressure and soil-borne plant diseases without using chemical pesticides. And they knew that they could use heat to somewhat pasteurize the soil to eliminate these unwanted pests without sterilizing the soil. And this was picked up in other warm climate areas such as Spain, Italy, and California. And several scientists, plant pathologists, and weed scientists at UC Davis did a lot of research on soil solarization. So what we did not know is how well soil solarization would work in the Pacific Northwest. We have what's called a marginally suitable climate for soil solarization because we are at a fairly northerly latitude here, about 45 degrees north. And even though we have long days, the angle of the sun is such that we don't have the high temperatures that you would get closer to the equator. But recent advancements in the type of horticultural plastic films has made it more possible to consider soil solarization in the Pacific Northwest because these new kinds of plastic films are better at capturing the solar energy. Now, most of my experience on soil solarization has been in tree nurseries. And you probably know, if you're from Oregon, that the greenhouse and nursery industry is extremely important in Oregon. In fact, this is our #1 agricultural commodity. And tree nurseries in particular are very high value. It includes trees grown as ornamentals for fruit, shade, and flowering. It includes Christmas trees, and it includes conifers grown for reforestation. But one of the challenges in tree nurseries is how to manage the weeds and the soil-borne pathogens. One of the problems is that because of the tremendous diversity in plant material, there are multiple crops and therefore multiple diseases. And each one has their own specific set of pests which must be managed. They used to fumigate routinely, but there are increased restrictions on the use of these soil fumigants because of their very high toxicity. There's also a limited selection of pesticides that are registered for use on ornamentals, and a high potential for damage, crop damage by herbicides. So it was somewhat surprising to me to learn that many nurseries rely on hand weeding to take care of their weed problems. This is very, very costly, as you might imagine, and currently it's very difficult to find labor for this difficult work. Now, in forest tree seedling nurseries, soil fumigation is still a widespread practice. In fact, forest tree seedling nurseries are among the very few industries where methyl bromide is still allowed to be used. This is a very dangerous fumigant, and it depletes the ozone layer. So it has been phased out in most agricultural systems, still used in forest tree nurseries. So we would really like to find some alternative strategies to manage weeds and soil-borne pathogens in tree nurseries. I'm going to describe a production cycle in a tree nursery and how soil solarization fits into this. I want you to be thinking about how you might adapt this to your own interests in using soil solarization, how it would fit into your cropping system or in your restoration interests. So in a typical field production tree nursery, in the first year, starting in the upper left here, let's see, you should be able to see my pointer. The ground is prepared, it's tilled. Usually a cover crop is grown that is tilled in, and beds are formed, fully formed, and then they wait until fall to plant seeds. That would be this picture over here in the bottom right. What we've done is taken this fallow period in the summertime, in July and August, and use this to solarize the fully formed beds before they're planted in the fall. So in the upper left would be the following year 2 of this production cycle. You can see in the center bed, in the upper left, you can see some seedlings coming up. These are, I think, Mazard cherry seedlings. And this happens to be a bed that had been solarized, so there aren't very many weeds in it. You can see next to it a very weedy bed that was not solarized. I'm getting ahead of myself a little bit, but those seedlings then are allowed to grow during the summer, and then in the fall, they would be dug where they would be used as grafting material or transplanted to another bed. So we are making use of that fallow period in year 1 to squeeze in a period of soil solarization. I'll be giving a few examples, not in tree nurseries later, but I want to explain where we did most of our research. When we wanted to find out if this would work in the Pacific Northwest, we engaged with primarily 2 nurseries in Oregon, one in Clackamas County and one in Yamhill County, and they were very generous in allowing us to do our work in their nursery, and they were very supportive of our efforts, and we thank them very much for that. It was J. Frank Schmidt Nursery in Boring, and it was Bailey Nursery in Yamhill County. Here's our research team manually applying the plastic for solarization to a fully formed bed. Notice that they're putting this clear plastic very tightly over the bed, and they're shoveling soil on the sides of the beds to hold the plastic tightly in place. This is very important because we don't want it blowing away. We don't want any heat to escape. Well, this is a very typical picture of what happens once the plastic is removed and the beds are planted. You can see that this was planted. Here are the little tiny furrows where the, in this case, cherry seeds were planted in September, October. And later in October, you can see the kind of weeds that have developed in the non-solarized bed as compared to the solarized bed. So in a normal situation, the nursery would have to pay a lot of money to have their weeders come through and hand weed all of these little weeds before they get out of hand. So we're quite excited that this worked so well, and that led to a flurry of other activity. We wanted to find out what would be the effects on the subsequent crop the next spring. So we looked at solarization effects on oak seedlings. So this would have been some beds that were solarized in 2014, and this picture is from May of 2015. So the right beds over here were solarized, whereas the ones over here were not. And you can see there's quite a big difference in the amount of weeds between those two plots. And here's another cropped linden seedlings. In this case, the solarized are in the 3 beds over on the left, the non-solarized, the 3 beds over on the right. And then here's one on Mazur cherry seedlings, solarized on the right and non-solarized control on the left. And you might notice that in addition, there's seems to be better growth in the solarized plots. And we were excited about that and wondered why that might be, and did some investigating. Well, I wanted to talk for a second about why soil solarization works, how it works. This is this graphic shows the relative heat sensitivity of different kinds of soil organisms. And this was from a rather old publication in 1974, where they subjected soil to 30 minutes of aerated steam. So that's different than solarization. But let me just orient you. On the left is the temperature scale in Fahrenheit. And here on the right is the temperature scale in Celsius. But what you can see is that most plant pathogenic fungi, bacteria, and viruses are eliminated by around 140 degrees Fahrenheit or 60 degrees Celsius. This is a 30-minute exposure, whereas most saprophytic fungi and bacteria, that is those that live on dead material, do not cause disease, have a higher temperature threshold. And you might think about the fact that organisms involved in composting are quite heat tolerant, but they are not the ones that cause disease on plants. Notice also that most weed seeds are eliminated by around 170 degrees Fahrenheit or around 78 degrees Celsius. However, there are a few resistant weed seeds and a few resistant viruses that can tolerate very high temperatures. So when we are solarizing at some of these lower temperatures for longer periods of time, we are eliminating some of these pest species, but we're not eliminating all of the microbes that are in soil by any means. When we solarize, we always record the temperature in the soil at about 2 inches and 6 inches below the surface to give us an idea of how well the solarization is working. I'm going to take a little time to explain this rather complicated couple of graphs because I think it's important. On the left would be the typical temperature pattern over a week. This happens to be a week in July of 2017. And over on the right is the non-solarized plot during the very same time period. And each one of these peaks is a daily increase in temperature that reflects the solar heating. So it heats during the day, cools off during the night, heats during the day, cools off during the night. And these are 3 different plots. If we have 3 different lines, this would be at the 5 centimeter or roughly 2-inch depth. And at the black, where's my cursor here? At the black, that would be deeper down at about 15 centimeters or 6 inches. So what we see is we get much higher temperatures closer to the surface, which is what you would expect, but greater temperature fluctuations. We also lose more heat at night. You might wonder what this red line is. This red line, which is placed at 35 degrees centigrade, which is equivalent to 95 degrees Fahrenheit, just serves as a reference temperature so that we can more easily compare our temperatures, and it will become apparent later. One of the measures of soil temperature, solar heating, is how many hours above this reference temperature do we have. So you can see here we'd have many more hours above that reference temperature in the solarized than in the non-solarized. Okay. Well, one of the first things we did was compare different types of plastic film. And I'm going to discuss mainly the differences between regular plastic that you would buy at any box store for construction purposes, for example, versus this anti-condensation plastic, which was the newer type of plastic I was talking about. It was developed for use in greenhouses where people didn't want to have drips constantly, falling down on them. Plus, they wanted the plastic to stay clear and not have a lot of condensation on the underside to let more light through. So we tested this horticultural grade of anti-condensation, or also called anti-drip plastic, against the regular plastic to see what kind of soil temperatures we got and to see what the effects would be on plant growth and weeds and soil-borne pathogens. We monitored soil temperature with some sensors that are attached to a data logger so that we can continuously monitor temperature over time. And just to give you an idea of what this looks like close up, here's some regular plastic over on the left, and this is our anti-condensation plastic on the right. Regular plastic, if you lay it on ground and seal up the edges, right away you'll see that there's condensation forming on the underside of this plastic, which diffuses and blocks the light from getting in, and you don't get as much solar heating as you do with the anti-condensation plastic. This plastic is engineered in such a way that the water condenses on the underside, but then sheets across to the side of the plastic and leaves this area clear so that you get higher temperatures with this anti-condensation plastic. And just to show you a little bit of data about this, here's where I'm going to be comparing the hours over that reference temperature of 95 degrees as a measure of, as a way of comparing these different types of plastics. So over here, these two are anti-condensation plastics. These two are not. These are regular plastic, and here's our non-solarized. We're looking at temperatures at 2 different depths, 2 inches and 6 inches. And you can see that the anti-condensation results in many more hours over 95 degrees than the regular plastic where we have condensation forming. Okay. And let's just show you a couple of data slides showing how weeds are reduced by solarization. In the turquoise bars are non-solarized treatment, and the orangey red ones are solarized. So this would be in the fall after solarization, and we see that solarization results in a drastic reduction of many weed species: annual bluegrass, little bittercress, mouse or chickweed, and so on. And there is a carryover effect to the following spring. So this would be May following solarization the previous summer. And we see slightly different species, weed species, but they are all drastically reduced in the solarized plots relative to the non-solarized. So this translated to a very nice cost savings for the nurseries in terms of reducing labor by approximately 50%. This is the nursery in Clackamas County. This is the one in Yamhill County. And there was about a 50% reduction in the time needed to weed the solarized plots as compared to the non-solarized. In addition, we wanted to look at the effects on soil-borne plant pathogens. Now, in this photo on the right, you can see that there are a number of seedlings that have damped off or been killed kind of early in their growth cycle, soon after germination. And these plants were killed by damping off pathogens, Pythium and Fusarium, they're very, very common in nurseries and in fact, many agricultural crops. They're a little bit hard to see. We're looking down on the plot, but you can see some dead seedlings here in the red circles next to some healthy ones. But seedling damping off was reduced by soil solarization, leading to better crop growth. Again, a kind of a comparison of the diseased and healthy plants. And then to put some numbers on this, we actually sampled the soil and determined how many spores of these pathogens were present by plating them onto Petri dishes. And we found that in our non-solarized plots, we had many more of these propagules, many more of these spores per gram of soil than in our solarized. So in fact, we completely eliminated Pythium at 2 inches and completely eliminated Fusarium in the top 2 inches by solarizing. Note that it's the lower depth, 6 inches, we did not completely eliminate the pathogen. So with soil solarization, you're really heating the very top surface and killing the weed seeds and the pathogens really in the top couple of inches of soil. That's why it's so important not to till or otherwise disturb the soil after solarizing, because you would be bringing up this soil from deeper down, which never achieved high temperatures and still contains the pathogens and the weed seeds. And here's just a visual to show these Petri dishes are from a solarized plot. We don't get very many Fusarium colonies growing here, whereas the Petri dishes on the right, this is from diluting soil from a non-solarized plot, and we have many colonies of Fusarium and other fungi. So the suppression of plant pathogens results in 2 things. It results in a greater stand density, shown here on the right, and it results also in an increase in seedling vigor, which here is just recorded as seedling height. It was very common for us to see taller plants and more plants in the solarized plots compared to the non-solarized plots. So just to kind of summarize that nursery work, I want to show you this time series, all looking at the same plots over a 1-year period. So starting at the top, we have 2 beds here on the side that are solarized, one in the middle that's not solarized. And at the end of the summer, the plastic was removed and cherry seeds were planted in very shallow furrows in all 3 plots. But in the following spring, you can see the emergence of these seedlings, cherry seedlings, in these two plots. The cherry seedlings are still here, but obscured by weeds in the non-solarized plot. And then by July, of course, this plot was weeded. It was part of the timing experiment, actually. But we removed those, or the crews removed those weeds, and you can still see quite a much more vigorous stand in the solarized plots, and a denser stand as compared to the central one, which is non-solarized. So to kind of encapsulate the advantages and disadvantages of soil solarization, one of the disadvantages is that you either need specialized equipment or hand labor to install the plastic. And on a large scale, that can be difficult. A little bit later, I'll show you some machinery that's used for applying plastic in a large scale. There's the cost of the plastic, which if you're just covering the beds, of course, is a lot less than if it's covering an entire acre. Plastic is a fossil fuel product, and we try to minimize the use of fossil fuel products, but on a small scale, this can be reusable from year to year, like for the home gardener, that can be reusable. On a large scale, at least until my most recent information was that the plastic used for large scale agriculture was being recycled by Agriplas. And so they would actually come and pick this up and turn this into plastic containers for agricultural chemicals. The solarization window is not compatible with many cropping systems. So remember, this takes 3 to 6 weeks right out of the most, the warmest time of the summer. And so that doesn't fit into many cropping systems. There has to be a window of opportunity during the midsummer for this to work. So solarization is best suited for the fall planted crops, either crops which are seeded in the fall or where transplants would be planted in the fall. Also, it's not effective against all weed and plant pathogen species, and I'll talk more about that in a second. But the benefits are a reduction in labor for hand weeding, the reduced need for herbicides, fumigation, and tillage, which could result in potential long-term benefits in soil quality. It's suitable for organic production, likely results in long-term reduction in weed seed bank and crop growth benefits. I wanted to mention some weeds that we know are not controlled by solarization here in the Pacific Northwest. And these are some of our most pernicious weeds. Himalayan blackberry, Scotch broom, Canada thistle, and bindweed cannot be controlled by solarization because they have very deep rooted root systems, and the heating of the soil surface will really do nothing to prevent resprouting from these deep root systems. Common purslane, on the other hand, is a very small seeded crop, which and does not have deep roots, but the seeds are actually stimulated by heat. So in a couple of occasions, we found purslane coming up underneath the plastic. It actually liked that environment very much. Fortunately, purslane is not too terrible a weed in this area, and it's even an edible crop. So this one was not of great concern, but do not attempt to solarize a thicket of blackberry, Scotch broom, Canada thistle, and bindweed, because it will not work. How do you decide when to solarize and how long to solarize? Our team at OSU developed an online forecasting tool to help people decide this. I put the link here for the beta version of this forecasting tool. It was developed for Western Washington, Western Oregon, and California. And it utilizes historical weather data from all the individual weather stations in specific geographic locations to develop a predictive model. So it will help you predict the best start date and time needed to effectively solarize. And we have 6 target pest species in there, 3 weed species and 3 plant pathogen species. And I have a couple screenshots of that, which I can show you. Here again is the URL. And when you come to this website, you will be asked to pull from a drop-down menu your location to the nearest weather station. And I picked one for this from Jordan, which is in Marion County. And I picked a start date of July 1 and an end date of July 31 for this year. And then I get to choose what year to use as a forecast. And I tried using 2021, but there were some gaps in the data collection for 2021 at that location. So I went back to 2020. This website was originally developed for container nurseries that would have a layer of rock on the surface, but in a normal field setting, you would not have any rock. So I put no crushed rock. I plugged in this temperature of 72 degrees for my soil temperature before solarization. That's something that can easily be measured or obtained from the web. And then I checked all the different pest species, 1, 2, 3 plant pathogens and 1, 2, 3 weeds. And then I run the model. And this is the kind of output that I get. It predicts the soil temperatures at 3 different depths, at the surface, at 2 inches, and at 6 inches. Here is the temperature in Fahrenheit. Here it is in centigrade. And then here are the dates running from July 1 through July 31st. And remember, this is predicting the soil temperature based on 2020 actual data. And so it's not going to be perfect, but it's going to give you a fairly good idea of what to expect in your area if the weather is similar to that year. And like we saw in the previous slide about temperature, we see this diurnal pattern of solar heating during the day, much higher at the surface than down at 6 inches. And again, I want you to notice that the temperatures that we're seeing down at 6 inches really never make it across that 95-degree threshold, or maybe once or twice. You would not have very many hours above 95 degrees at that 6 inches, whereas you do achieve temperatures higher than that most days, most of the days except for right here at the 2 inches depth. So you never want to bring up that soil from 6 inches below the surface and mix it in with solarized soil from 2 inches, because you're bringing up pests and weed seeds and pathogens from essentially unheated soil. For each of the different pests that are included in the model, you can then predict the time needed to solarize at a given soil depth. This is the output for annual bluegrass. Again, we're in Marion County, predicting for 2022. And if we begin solarizing on July 1, this shows the depth at which the weed seeds, the annual bluegrass seeds, will be killed over time. And so we'll achieve our best success at about July 23rd, and then it doesn't really improve beyond that. So about 3 weeks would be enough to eliminate annual bluegrass seed from the top couple of inches. This is inches over here and centimeters over here. This red line is the seed bank limit. So we know that the seed bank goes down quite a bit deeper. We're not touching any of the seeds at this depth by solarizing, but we are eliminating the ones in the surface, which are likely to actually emerge. Okay, now some practical tips for solarizing soil. First, till to make a good seed bed. You can't have any plants growing on the surface, no weeds, no grass, no lumps on the surface. You want to shape or prepare the soil as if you're ready to plant it. If possible, orient the beds from north to south. Moisten that soil if it's very dry, because that will activate the weed seeds. Cover it very tightly with the solarization plastic. Seal the edges with soil, including a band around the sides, band of 8 to 12 inches wide to weight down that plastic. If any holes or tears develop, you can repair it with greenhouse repair tape. The heat will leak right out of those holes. For example, animal hooves, deer walking across the solarization plastic will puncture that plastic and will need to be repaired. Leave the plastic on until just before planting. And when you plant the seeds or transplants, disturb the soil as little as possible. Do not till, as this will bring up that unheated soil up to the surface. Here's a diagram showing first till, water, cover, solarize, and then plant. What kind of plastic should I use? Use clear polyfilm. This is more effective than black plastic at actually increasing the solar heating of the soil, underlying soil. You can use any thickness. Plastic is measured in a very funny unit called a mil. A mil is 1/1000th of an inch. And it doesn't matter for the heating. The thicker stuff is much more expensive, but it holds up better and maybe can be reused year after year. Whereas the thinner stuff is cheaper, but is more fragile. Make sure, if it's available, to buy anti-condensation or anti-drip, same thing, kind of film. And this is sold as horticultural or high tunnel film or solarizing film. Many people make it. It is your regular greenhouse poly, but get it with the anti-condensation property if you can. There is, many times you have to order large rolls of this stuff, but TNR Lumber in Woodburn sells it by the linear foot, and that's very nice for small scale applications. Solarize for 3 to 6 weeks. Longer is always better. Early July through August is the best time. And check the online forecasting tool for your specific location and target species. So methods for applying, I've told you about the manual way, and this can be done. Just make sure it's not a windy day. Get it really tight. The commercial nurseries that we work with do it this way. It's really slick. It covers the sides of the bed at the same time that it's laying the plastic. What about how small can you go? You want to avoid using really tiny pieces of plastic to try to solarize, because you won't get the solar heating that you want. I had a graduate student who actually compared solar heating under different size solarization pieces of plastic, and anything less than about 6 feet by 6 feet did not heat up as well as it should, as well as we need. Okay, I want to switch now and talk about some other applications of soil solarization. So not tree nurseries, but container nurseries, organic vegetable seed production. You can use it for disinfesting used pots and soil, for home gardens, establishing native plant gardens for pollinators, so on. So here's an example of solarizing a gravel bed in a commercial container nursery. The idea here was to disinfest the soil and the gravel and the underlying soil in a container nursery, that to see if we could eliminate a pathogen called Phytophthora vermorum from these container nurseries, and it works extremely well. This is the organic student farm at OSU, and they routinely solarize beds now in the summer for any of their fall planted crops. So both of these strips were solarized. This area in the center is just a walkway, but it leaves it nice and weed free when it comes time to either seeding or transplanting fall vegetable crops. This is a demonstration trial at the North Willamette Research and Extension Center, where they planted mustard greens. They compared the planting of mustard in a non-solarized tilled situation, shown here and here, versus a solarized plot here. They left the plastic on here just to show people what that looked like. The drill was not working too well, so we don't actually have as many rows of mustard seed as we would like, but note the difference in the weeds. And then another experiment at the botany farm, in this case, was solarizing to establish a wildflower buffer strip. So here's a non-solarized strip, and then here was an area that was solarized and then planted to establish natives. And it worked very well at suppressing the weeds. And now, let's see, I'm going to talk about a more recent example. And Emily Brand and her family have a grass seed farm near the Santiam River in Lynn County. And Emily is on the webinar today and has graciously agreed to answer any questions about the work that she did on her family's farm to get rid of an old hedgerow site and establish a pollinator friendly buffer strip of native plants. So this is a shot. I'll describe the situation, and then we'll get Emily to respond to questions in the question and answer period. So this picture is from February 2020, and it shows the edge of the grass seed field. And then here is the old hedgerow, which is a lot of woody plant material and blackberries. They prepared the site very thoroughly by tilling and mechanically removing a lot of the woody plants. They laid down the plastic on July 4th. They did this manually. And this is, I believe, 12 feet by 200 feet, if I'm not mistaken. And they left the plastic on for a good long time until October, when they removed the plastic, and then they hand sowed a mixture of native plant seeds, and they gently rake them into the soil surface so as not to disturb the soil. The following spring, this is a view of that area that was solarized, and the weeds were much reduced, but there were also blackberries that popped up, as well as some grasses that were not controlled by the solarization. And they treated the blackberries with herbicide and otherwise tried to mechanically remove some of these weeds. This is a picture 1 year later, so just a few days ago. The grasses appear to dominate, but there are many wildflower species and also some planted shrubs that are in these nice little protections to prevent deer browse. And so these are some of the wildflower species that Emily photographed from within this pollinator border. So in conclusion, soil solarization reduces weed emergence and reduces disease caused by certain soil-borne plant pathogens. The anti-condensation plastic is more effective than the regular plastic for solar heating. And we think that soil solarization can be a very effective pest management tool for fall planted crops or native plants, reducing the need for chemical pesticides and tillage. For more information, you can look at any of these websites. This one is it's from the University of California IPM Center, the online forecasting tool, and then the final report from our solarization project with nurseries with all of the data can be found here. And with that, I want to thank all the people from OSU that worked on this project. The faculty included Dr. Carol Mallory Smith, a weed scientist, Maria Dragila, a soil physicist, and several graduate students, Nami Wada, Clara Weidman, Brian Hill, and Logan Bennett, as well as a whole crew of undergraduates. So with that, I hope I've left enough time for some questions, and I look forward to hearing what your questions are. Thank you.
Yes, we have some time for questions. Thank you, Jennifer. If you could put those in the chat, then I'll read the questions for Jennifer and Emily, if you have any for her as well. Thanks, Emily, for joining us today too. While we're waiting for questions, if you have any, I just wanted to let everyone know, our faithful First Friday followers, we're going to be taking July off from First Fridays, but we should be back in August. So you can keep checking our website for that as well. Okay, we do have a question. Thank you, Dr. Parke. Please talk a little about solarization applications for the home gardener.
Okay, thanks for that question. So I'm a home gardener. More specifically, my husband is a home gardener, and solarization works very, very well if you can set aside one section of your garden to solarize during the middle of the summer. And that's always the crunch, is how can you afford that space, which normally you would use for growing your vegetable. So you just have to maybe do it piecemeal over time. So you might want to do it just one bed a year and solarize. You could also squeeze it in after, say, an early crop, say of peas, and before a fall planted crop, such as some of your brassicas or garlic, or one of your fall kinds of things. So it's a little hard to squeeze it in, but you can do it piecemeal over time.
And one other question has shown up. Can you kill grass by solarizing over it?
That's a tough one, because you get much better solar heating if you have close contact between the soil surface and the top of the plastic. And grass typically is, it's kind of fluffy and it sticks up, and you don't get that close contact. what you might want to do with grass, if you're primarily trying to get rid of grass, you might want to actually use the black plastic, because that will prevent it from growing. It will it will kill the grass blades, but maybe not kill the roots quite as well. But there's another technique you might want to use, and that's tarping, which is different than using the solar heating, but it's just a combination of kind of suffocating and prolonged darkness, which will kill it. So I've seen people fail at killing grass with solarization when the plastic is all puffy over the top, and it just, the heat rises within that bubble and does not kill the grass very well. Sorry. Any other questions?
Yeah, one more. What was the name of the vendor in Woodburn who sells the by
Okay.
the lineal foot?
TNR lumber supply. But almost any horticultural supply place, greenhouse supply place will carry this type of poly. But the nice thing about TNR is that you can buy it by the linear foot as opposed to an entire roll. I see Emily there. Emily, if you could unmute yourself. Great.
Hello. Thanks
Hi.
for having me.
Hi. Emily really did some inspiring work there to try to create a pollinator buffer around her grass seed farm, and I really want to commend her on that. And you can see it was a lot of work, and she's continuing to put a lot of work into it. But I think she's getting there. I want to get up to that site and see what that nasty grass species is that's causing the problem. But
yeah, please do. It was a couple of days of a lot of work, but really once you get the plastic on there, we let it go for 4 months just about, and then we were ready for planting upon immediate removal of the plastic. And we planted in the fall. The first year was fairly successful. Like Dr. Park said, we had some blackberries come up, which we put a real good herding on them, but obviously did not kill them off. And just kind of nipped those in the bud as soon as they emerged. And then this year we're having a lot of problems with the grasses. So we're gonna have to get back out there, but it's been a fun project. It's been inspiring, and hopefully those plants will mature. And we're already seeing a lot more pollinators in the area. So
that's great. That's terrific.
Yeah.
Thanks for that work, and thanks for being so generous and sharing your
beautiful
photos. It's one of the nicest series I know of that shows that process of preparing the ground.
Yeah, we wanted only native pollinator plants. I did a lot of research on trying to get plants that bloomed throughout the growing season, from early to late bloom, and then a variety of colors and shapes, I was told, will attract the pollinators. So I went to Heritage Seedlings, and they have a lot of really, really neat, very localized mixes of specifically for pollinators, and then use some other resources through the Oswego seedling sale. I got those shrubs out there this year. So it's definitely a project that's not one season. It's going to be several seasons to come, but hopefully it'll just improve.
Right. Soil solarization is used a lot for restoration purposes, especially in California. So I was really pleased to see people, trying to use that up here. There are a few kinks that need to be worked out, but I think it has a lot of potential.
We have a question that came in for Emily. I think you partially answered it already in your discussion there, but can you suggest various wildflower species that will compete with grasses?
That will compete with grasses?
Yeah.
I cannot answer that one because mine are all kind of failing right now. I don't know. I'm not a botanist of any sort, but the ones I did plant, I knew the research that I did was I wanted the most local in my microclimate as possible. and good for pollinators. And the grasses are definitely taking over. I planted everything in seed except this spring I did the shrubs. And so those shrubs, I've been keeping the grasses back and so allowing those to establish, but everything else, the grasses pretty much have been taking over. So I can't answer that one very well, but maybe if you talk to a master gardener, they might have more information.
Yeah, and for our audience, you can also check out our district's website. We do have some information on there about native plants. And also we have a native plant sale that will be next winter, early spring. So I think this last year it started, we started selling in February, I think. Those are some options as well. And we could have a conservation planner here at our district that could help you with those questions as well. If you reside in Marion County, and if you don't, then you could still give us a ring. We can try to help you out or connect you with somebody who can. All right, well, it looks like that is the end of our questions. I want to thank you both, especially Dr. Parke, for joining us today.